The taste of ash and chitin filled my mouth as the shadow passed over the Emperor's palace for the first time. My name is Castellan Aldric Voss, former commander of Terra's Northern Aegis defense grid. I watched 60 billion souls die in 17 days. You think that makes me a failure, but you don't know what I've seen. The Astronomican went dark on day 3. The Golden Throne's heartbeat stuttered on day 7. By day 12, the biomass towers had consumed the Himalayan plateaus, where humanity first learned to dream. Terra didn't fall to weakness. It fell because the Hive Mind learned what the Emperor knew: that one world, no matter how sacred, is just meat and minerals to a hunger that spans galaxies. This is my testimony from the final hours of humanity's cradle. Chapter 1. The Shadow Arrives. I remember the exact moment our Auspex arrays went insane. 0347 hours, Terran Standard. I was reviewing defensive protocols in the Northern Aegis command bunker, 3 kilometers beneath what used to be called Ursh territory. The chamber hummed with the constant background noise of a billion defensive systems maintaining their eternal vigil. Tech priests moved between cogitator banks like red-robed ghosts, their mechadendrites interfacing with systems that had protected humanity's birthworld for 10,000 years. Captain Tyranids, my second in command, was arguing with me about ammunition distribution ratios. A pointless argument in retrospect. We were debating whether to stock plasma canisters or bolt shells for defensive positions that would be overrun in hours. But we didn't know that yet. Terra hadn't fought a real war in millennia. We'd become very good at ceremony and very poor at survival. The warning klaxon changed everything. Not the standard alert tone. This was the ancient frequency reserved for extinction-level threats. Every officer in the bunker froze. Servitors stopped mid-task, their lobotomized brains responding to override protocols coded into their flesh circuitry. The main hololith flickered to life, projecting a 3-dimensional map of the Sol system. What I saw made no sense. The entire outer system was gone. Not destroyed, not invaded. Gone. Pluto's orbital station had ceased transmitting. Neptune's methane processing platforms, silent. Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, every monitoring station, every defense satellite, every listening post simply stopped existing in our tactical reality. Castellan, Tech Magos Helbrecht's augmented voice crackled through the vox. We're detecting gravimetric anomalies consistent with... He paused, and I heard what might have been fear in his mechanical tone. Multiple Mandeville points opening simultaneously, thousands of them. I leaned over the tactical display, my hands gripping the brass railing that encircled the hololith. The numbers scrolling across subsidiary screens defied comprehension. 14,000 void signatures emerging from warp translation, not ships, organisms, each one the size of a hab block, their biological heat signatures blooming like flowers in the black garden of space. Get me the High Lords, I ordered. Now. Thera was already moving, her fingers dancing across runic keyboards that connected to the Imperial Palace's deepest chambers. In the hololith, I watched the void signatures organize themselves with disturbing precision. They weren't scattering like an invasion fleet searching for targets. They were assembling, forming a sphere that enclosed the entire inner system in a living cage. The vox crackled. Castellan Voss, this is Lord Commander Militant Augustine. Report. I'd met Augustine twice before. He was a political appointment, a nobleman who'd never fired a weapon in anger. His voice carried the casual authority of someone accustomed to threats being theoretical. Lord Commander, we have massive Xenos incursion. Outer system is dark. I'm reading... I checked the numbers again, hoping I'd misread them. 14,000 plus bioforms entering inner system space. Trajectory plots show Terra as primary target. Silence on the vox. Then, Tyranids. Biosignatures match archived patterns from Hive Fleet Leviathan, but the scale... I watched the hololith update as more contacts emerged from the warp. Sir, this is larger than Leviathan, Behemoth, and Kraken combined. This is a super Hive fleet. Maybe the Super Hive fleet. More silence. In the background of the Vox, I heard other voices, shouting, disbelief, someone crying. The High Lords were panicking. The Masters of Terra, who commanded armies that could crack planets, were afraid. What are our defensive capabilities? Augustine finally asked. I'd wargamed this scenario 1,000 times in simulations. Terra was the most heavily defended world in the Imperium. The Aegis defense grid alone could generate enough firepower to sterilize a continent. The Sol system bristled with weapon platforms, killsats, and automated defense stations. The Imperial Navy's home fleet comprised 300 capital ships. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's own bodyguards, numbered 10,000 of humanity's finest warriors. None of it would matter. We can hurt them, I said carefully. But Lord Commander, if they're willing to pay the price, they'll reach the surface. The question is how much biomass they're willing to sacrifice. The hololith updated again. The Tyranid sphere was contracting, tightening around Mars, Luna, Terra. I watched the estimated time to contact counter spin downward. 72 hours until the first wave reached Terra's orbital space. Activate all defense protocols, Augustine ordered. I'm calling for reinforcements from every available chapter. Every Navy battle group within warp transit range. We'll make them pay for every meter. The Vox clicked off. Thera moved beside me, her face pale in the hololith's blue light. Castellan. Even if every chapter in Segmentum Solar responded immediately, it would take weeks to assemble a relief force. I know. We're alone. I know. A tech priest approached, his movements jerky with agitation. Castellan, we're receiving reports from the outer system monitoring stations before they went dark. Battle cant transmissions, automated distress signals. He handed me a data slate. I read the fragmentary reports. Pluto station. Biological matter consuming fusion reactors. Neptune platform. 7. They are not destroying the infrastructure, they are eating it. Jupiter orbital dock. Void shields useless against boarding organisms. Atmospheric processors converted to digestion pools. They weren't just invading, they were feeding, converting everything, metal, stone, flesh, void-hardened plasteel, into biomass for the swarm. I handed the slate back to the tech priest. Begin evacuation protocols for non-combat personnel. Prioritize children under 10 and genetic archives. Sir, evacuation where? The Tyranids control every approach vector to the system. He was right. Terra was in a cage. A hungry cage that was contracting by the hour. Then we make a record, I said quietly. Everything we know about their tactics, their biology, their weakness. None of it changed the mathematics of mass and velocity. I watched the hololith obsessively, tracking the Tyranid fleet's approach. They moved with eerie precision, maintaining perfect formation as they accelerated toward the inner system. Our long-range augers detected something else too. Smaller organisms, millions of them, spreading out from the main fleet like seeds from a flower. Spores. Mycetic spores, carrying the initial invasion force. At hour 68, the home fleet engaged them at the orbit of Mars. I watched the battle through picked feed relays, saw our proud warships pour lance fire and macro cannon rounds into the approaching swarm. For brief moments, I let myself hope. The Tyranids burned. Thousands of bioforms died in silent explosions of flash-frozen ichor and boiling chitin. But for every organism that died, 3 more pushed forward. The swarm adapted, individual creatures learning from each death, evolving tactics in real time. By hour 70, the home fleet was in full retreat toward Terra, having destroyed perhaps 15% of the attacking force. The Tyranids had paid their entry fee in blood. Now they were coming for the main course. Chapter 2. First contact. The spores hit Luna first. I watched through the orbital pict feeds as millions of them slammed into humanity's oldest colony. They struck like kinetic meteors, their organic hulls absorbing impacts that would shatter adamantium. Each spore was the size of a drop pod, carrying 30 to 40 organisms designed specifically for that initial assault. Luna had 3 billion inhabitants across dozens of habitation domes. It had defense turrets, void shields, and garrison forces that included 2 companies of Imperial fists. For 6 hours, they held. The transmission from Lunar Base Alpha ended mid-sentence. Genestealers breaching the tertiary dome were falling back to static, then screaming, then nothing. 3 billion people became biomass. I stood in the command bunker, watching estimates on the tactical display update themselves as our cogitators processed the loss. 3 billion human beings, 10,000 years of lunar infrastructure, uncounted technological artifacts and genetic libraries, all of it being broken down into raw materials for the swarm. Castellan. Terra's voice was hollow. Spore descent beginning in Terra's upper atmosphere. Estimated numbers. She paused, rechecking her data slate as if hoping the numbers would change. 800 million individual impacts predicted across the planet. 800 million. 800 million. I'd commanded defensive operations on Forge worlds, helped coordinate planetary evacuations in the path of WAG invasions. I'd seen horrors that would break civilian minds. None of it prepared me for this scale of attack. Aegis batteries, I asked. Firing solutions calculated for the Northern Hemisphere. Southern Aegis reports ready status. The Imperial Palace's defense systems are autonomous. They'll engage automatically. The first spores began to burn through Terra's atmosphere like falling stars. Our defensive grid opened fire, lance batteries and macro cannons tracking targets with machine precision. The sky above Terra turned white with explosions. Millions of spores burned away, their organic hulls unable to withstand the concentrated fire. But millions more got through. I watched one impact on the pict feed, a spore hitting the Ursh wastes about 40 kilometers from our position. The organic pod split open on impact, disgorging its cargo of termagants and hormigons. They moved immediately, no hesitation, no confusion. The Hive Mind directed them with absolute coordination toward the nearest human settlement. Across the planet, the same scene repeated 800 million times. The Vox network exploded with distress calls. Defense forces engaging across every continent. Civilian populations fleeing as razor-sharp claws and bioweapons tore through hab blocks. The Adeptus Arbites fought in the streets of the Imperial Palace's outer districts. PDF regiments that had never seen combat found themselves in desperate close-quarters battles with organisms designed by billions of years of predatory evolution. We need to establish triage priorities, I said, forcing my mind to work tactically. Which population centers can we actually defend? Techmagos Helbrecht interfaced directly with the tactical cogitators, his consciousness merging with the machine to process information faster than any human could manage. The Imperial Palace is secure. Custodian Guard has established a perimeter. The Mechanicus holds Mars. But the Hive cities. He paused. Castellan, we're receiving reports of civilian populations being herded. Herded? Not killed immediately. The Tyranids are driving them into designated areas, creating concentration zones. I felt ice in my stomach. The Tyranids were farming us, gathering the biomass into convenient collection points before beginning the harvest. A priority Vox signal cut through the chaos. All commands, this is High Lord Militant Augustine. The Emperor protects, but we must act as his sword. Fall back to primary strongpoints. Abandon tertiary defensive positions. Conserve ammunition for final defensive lines. I translated that in my head. We're losing. Retreat and die slowly instead of dying quickly. Castellan! One of the junior officers pointed at a pict feed. Northern Hive Cluster 7. They're requesting immediate fire support. Tyranid forces have breached the outer walls. I looked at the tactical display. Hive Cluster 7 held 80 million civilians. It also lay outside our primary defensive zone. Any forces I sent to reinforce them would weaken our core positions. Negative, I said, the word tasting like poison. All units maintain current positions. The junior officer stared at me. Sir, that's 80 million people. And there are 600 million in the zones we can defend. I won't trade certain deaths for possible deaths. He turned back to his station, but I saw the judgment in his eyes. In a single morning, I'd condemned 80 million human souls to death by Xenos. The weight of that decision should have crushed me. But there would be more decisions like it, worse decisions. The day was only beginning. By hour 12 of the invasion, we'd lost contact with 30% of Terra's surface. Not lost control, lost contact. Those areas had been so thoroughly overrun that no human Vox signals emerged. The Tyranids moved across the landscape like a living flood, consuming everything organic and leaving behind strange biomechanical structures in their wake. I watched through long-range augers as the first digestion pools formed in the Ursh wastes. Massive organisms, each the size of a cathedral, that broke down captured biomass into raw genetic material. Bodies, human bodies, were being dumped into those pools by the thousands. Soldiers who'd fought bravely, civilians who'd fled, children who'd hidden in whatever shelter they could find. All of it became nutrients for the swarm. They're building something, Tecmagos Helbrecht said, his augmented eyes processing spectral data faster than any human could interpret. Capillary towers. Each one is a biological factory using absorbed biomass to manufacture new organisms. How long until they're operational? They're operational now. Estimated production, 100,000 warrior forms per tower per day. The mathematics of that was crushing. Every human the Tyranids killed became resources to create more Tyranids. We were fighting an enemy that grew stronger with every casualty we inflicted. A new signal cut through the Vox chaos. Sister Superior Valeska of the Adepta Sororitas. This is Order of the Sacred Rose, defending the Ecclesiarchal Palace. We are holding, but enemy forces are adapting to our tactics. Request any available reinforcement. The Ecclesiarchal Palace held the greatest concentration of holy relics outside the Imperial Palace itself. If it fell, the spiritual heart of the Imperium would be torn out. Thera, what do we have available? She consulted her data slate. 4th Armored Regiment is in reserve, 6 kilometers from the palace. Send them. And Thera, I caught her eye. Tell them to guard the relics with their lives. She nodded and began transmitting orders. I turned back to the hololith, watching the infection spread across Terra's face. The Tyranids controlled perhaps 40% of the surface now. They'd established digestion pools across every major landmass. The capillary towers were growing, reaching toward Terra's sky like the fingers of a drowning man grasping for air. Except Terra was drowning in chitin and teeth, and there was no air to grasp. A tech priest approached with a data slate, his movements hesitant. Castellan, you need to see this. I took the slate and read the report from the Astronomican chamber deep within the Imperial Palace. The psychic beacon that guided ships across the Imperium was flickering. The psychers who maintained it were reporting psychic pressure. The Hive Mind, pressing against Terra, is psychic defenses, like a hand pressing against a membrane. How long? I asked. Unknown, Castellan. But if the Astronomican fails, if the Astronomican failed, every ship in the Imperium would be lost in the warp. Humanity's interstellar empire would fragment into isolated systems, cut off from each other forever. The Tyranids wouldn't just be destroying Terra, they'd be destroying the very possibility of human unity. I handed the slate back. Monitor it. Report any changes immediately. The next hours blurred together into an endless cycle of desperate decisions. Pull forces from this sector to reinforce that one. Abandon this hive to save that cathedral. Watch millions die on picked feeds while calculating whether their deaths would buy time for millions more to evacuate. By day's end, 20 billion humans were dead. The Tyranids had only just begun to feed. Chapter 3. The Astronomican Gutters. On day 3, the light went out. Their eyes, both flesh and augmetic, rolled back in their heads. Several collapsed, their mechadendrites writhing like dying snakes. Tech Magos Helbrecht remained standing, but blood ran from his nose and ears. A coldness in my soul, as if some fundamental warmth had been extracted from reality. Every human being on Terra felt it in that moment, the light that had guided humanity for 10,000 years flickering like a candle in a storm. The Vox erupted with panic signals from across the planet. Naval vessels in orbit reported their navigators screaming, clawing at their third eyes. Astropathic choirs fell silent as psychic communication became impossible. Even non-psychers felt the absence like a missing tooth. Something that should be there simply wasn't. "Get me a status report from the Imperial Palace," I ordered, fighting to keep my voice steady. When it came, Lord Commander Augustine's voice sounded years older than it had 3 days ago. "The Astronomican chamber is under direct assault," he said. "Not physical assault, trying to consume it like it consumes everything else. They're dying, Voss. 1 every 3 minutes. He paused, and I heard weapons fire in the background. "The Hive Mind is learning. It's starting to understand what the Astronomican is." That thought was more terrifying than any Carnifex charge. The Hive Mind was ancient and vast, but it had never encountered anything like the Astronomican, a psychic beacon powered by the sacrifice of thousands of psychers and the Emperor's own divine will. If it learned to counter that technology, the tech priests can't predict it. The variables are beyond calculation. The connection cut out as explosions rocked the Imperial Palace's foundations. I turned to Thera, who was coordinating our Northern Aegis forces. If the Astronomican fails, what happens to the relief fleets? She didn't need to consult any data. We both knew. They'll be scattered across the galaxy. Ships will emerge from the warp light years off course, if they emerge at all. No reinforcements will reach Terra. We were already alone. Now we'd be alone forever. The next hours proved how thoroughly the Tyranids had learned Terra's weaknesses. They shifted their assault strategy, no longer throwing endless waves at our fortified positions. Instead, they targeted infrastructure, water purification plants, power generators, food distribution networks. They were trying to collapse Terra's ability to sustain its population. 60 billion humans need water. They need food. They need power for the life support systems that maintained the Hive City's artificial environments. The Tyranids were going to starve us out. "Castellan!" A junior officer's voice cracked with stress. "Hive City Mortis, Southern Hemisphere. Their water reclamation system is offline. Tyranid organisms have contaminated the aquifer with digestive enzymes." I pulled up the tactical data. Hive City Mortis, population 4 billion. Water reserves for 36 hours without the reclamation system. "Can we drop supplies?" "Negative, sir. Tyranid air superiority organisms control the airspace. We'd lose every transport. 4 billion people. 36 hours of water. Then they'd die of thirst while the Tyranids waited outside the walls." "Log it," I said quietly. "Move to the next crisis." There was always a next crisis. The Tyranids breached the Mechanicus forges on Mars by the end of day 3. I watched the pict feeds from orbital satellites as swarms of termagants and hormagaunts overran the red planet's surface. The tech priests fought with their arcane weapons, arc rifles and plasma calivers and radiation guns. But flesh and blood warriors cannot defeat an enemy that learns from every death. Mars fell in 8 hours. The Mechanicus transmitted a final message. "The Omnissiah's forge is silent. The machine spirit weeps. We have failed." With Mars gone, Terra lost its primary manufacturer of advanced weapons and ammunition. The stockpiles we had would need to last until the end. There would be no resupply, no reinforcement, no victory. Only survival measured in hours. A tech priest approached me with data I didn't want to see. "Castellan, analysis of the capillary towers shows they're beginning second-stage growth. They're extending tendrils into Terra's crust, mining for minerals. Deep beneath Terra's surface, where ancient tunnels and forgotten tombs held humanity's oldest secrets, Tyranid organisms were digging, extracting iron and rare metals and radioactive elements, feeding the towers that manufactured more warriors. Current projections show they'll reach the Imperial Palace's lowest levels within 96 hours. The Emperor's own throne room sits on foundations of stone that have stood since humanity's birth. The Tyranids will undermine them. I imagined it. The Golden Throne, where the Emperor's broken body had sat for 10 millennia, collapsing into Tyranid excavated caverns. The master of mankind falling into darkness, while Xenos organisms consumed the very ground he'd walked in ancient days. Notify the custodian guard, I said. They need to prepare for deep structure defense. By the end of day 3, we'd lost half the planet's surface to Tyranid control. The remaining human population, now down to 40 billion, was concentrated into shrinking defensive zones around the Imperial Palace, the ecclesiarchal cathedral complexes, and a handful of hive cities that still had functional walls. The Astronomican continued to dim. Across the galaxy, ships were already becoming lost, their navigators unable to see the guiding light. The Imperium was fragmenting in real time, every hour bringing humanity closer to complete isolation. I stood before the hololith, watching colored lights represent the death of billions. Each light was a defensive position. Green meant held, yellow meant contested, red meant lost. The map looked like a disease progression chart, red spreading across Terra's continents like a cancer. Castellan, Thera said softly, you should rest. You've been awake for 60 hours. I managed something that might have been a laugh. When this is over, sleep won't matter. She didn't argue. What could she say? The mathematics were clear. Terra was dying. Humanity's birthworld, cradle of the species, holiest planet in the Imperium, dying from 1 million cuts inflicted by teeth and claws and bioweapons. A priority signal interrupted us. Sister Superior Valeska, her armor visible through the pict feed, covered in Xenos ichor. Castellan Voss, we've held the ecclesiarchal palace, but we're detecting something new. The Tyranids are building structures around the palace, like they're setting up a siege perimeter but organic. Growing walls. I pulled up orbital imagery. She was right. The Tyranids had constructed enormous chitinous barriers encircling the palace, each one 30 meters high and thick enough to withstand lance strikes. They weren't just attacking anymore. They were farming us, keeping us contained while they processed the rest of the planet. Hold your position, I told Valeska. Do not attempt to break through those walls. Conserve ammunition and pray. The Emperor protects Castellan. The Emperor protects, I repeated, though I no longer believed it. If the Emperor protected, why were we losing? Why had he allowed his birthworld to become a feeding ground for Xenos? Why did the Golden Throne dim while the Astronomican flickered and humanity screamed? I pushed those thoughts away. Heresy was a luxury I couldn't afford. A tech priest stumbled toward me, his robes torn, his augmetics sparking. Castellan, we've decrypted some of the Tyranid biological communication patterns. The Hive Mind is thinking about Terra, about what it means. What it means? Terra is more than biomass to them. They're analyzing our architecture, our art, our history. The Hive Mind is trying to understand why this world matters to us. I stared at him. Why would they care? Because, he said, his voice hollow, they want to consume not just our bodies, but our culture, our identity. They want to eat what Terra represents, not just what it contains. In that moment, I understood the true horror we faced. The Tyranids weren't just an invasion force. They were extinction made manifest. They didn't want to defeat humanity. They wanted to erase us from existence so completely that even the memory of our species would become nutrients for the swarm. The Astronomican flickered again, dimmer than before. Somewhere in the Imperial Palace, another psyker died holding back the psychic tide, and the Tyranids kept coming. Chapter 4. The Golden Throne cracks. Day 7 began with screaming from the deepest chambers of the Imperial Palace. The Vox transmission came through, corrupted with static and psychic interference, but the message was clear enough. The Golden Throne is failing. Repeat, the Golden Throne is failing. I abandoned the command bunker and took a transport into the Imperial Palace through secret tunnels that the Mechanicus had excavated millennia ago. The journey took 4 hours through passageways lined with defensive servitors and automated gun platforms. Even here, kilometers below Terra's surface, I could hear the distant vibrations of Tyranid excavation organisms boring through bedrock. The throne room was chaos when I arrived. Tech priests swarmed over machinery that had been ancient when humanity first reached the stars. Custodian guards stood in perfect formation around the Golden Throne itself, their guardian spears ready to die defending their charge. And there, at the center of it all, was the Emperor himself. I'd seen him once before, 15 years ago during my ceremonial induction as Castellan. Even then, his condition had been terrible. A corpse maintained by machinery and psychic will, neither dead nor truly alive. But now the Golden Throne was cracking. Literal fractures ran through the golden metal, hairline splits that leaked a light that hurt to perceive. The machinery groaned under strain that no human engineering could have calculated. And the Emperor, the master of mankind, the anathema, the God Emperor of 1,000,000 worlds, was screaming, not physically, psychically, a scream that resonated in the warp itself, that every psyker on Terra could feel like a knife through their third eye, a scream of pain that had lasted 10,000 years and was now reaching its crescendo. Captain General Trajan Valoris, leader of the Adeptus Custodes, stood before the throne in his golden armor. He turned as I approached, his face hidden behind his helmet, but his posture conveying absolute despair. "Castellan," he said, "you shouldn't be here." "With respect, Captain General, nowhere on Terra is safe anymore. I might as well witness the end in the throne room." He didn't argue. We both knew the truth. A tech priest, the High Fabricator himself, approached with data that damned us all. The Golden Throne was never designed to function indefinitely. It was a temporary measure, meant to sustain the Emperor until a permanent solution could be found. 10,000 years have stressed the machinery beyond all tolerances. "Can it be repaired?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Repaired? No. Maintained. Perhaps under ideal conditions. But we are mining components from equipment meant to regulate the Astronomican just to keep basic functions operational. And the Tyranids. He gestured at a seismic display showing Tyranid organisms digging beneath the palace. Their excavation is causing structural instabilities. The foundation itself is shifting. I studied the display. The Tyranids had bored hundreds of tunnels beneath the Imperial Palace, creating a hollow network of passages and chambers. They were mining precious metals from Terra's crust, but they were also weakening the ground beneath humanity's most sacred site. "How long?" I asked. The High Fabricator consulted his data slate. "Hours, days at most. When the throne fails, the Emperor will die. When the Emperor dies, the Astronomican will die. When the Astronomican dies, the Imperium will die." 3 deaths, 3 extinctions, all cascading from a single mechanical failure in a machine built before humanity had dreamed of touching the stars. Captain General Valoris spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The Emperor has foreseen this. He has always known his time was limited, but he hoped, we all hoped, that humanity would be strong enough to survive his passing, that the Imperium he built would endure even without his light. And now," I asked, "now the Tyranids devour that hope along with everything else." An explosion somewhere above shook dust from the throne room's vaulted ceiling. The battle for the palace's upper levels was intensifying. Tyranid warrior organisms had breached the outer sanctums and were fighting through corridors where Imperial heroes had walked for 10 millennia. "The Custodian Guard will hold the throne room," Valoris said. "We will die here if necessary, defending the Emperor's body from desecration. But Castellan, you should return to your command. Coordinate the defense while we still have forces to command." I wanted to argue, to stay and witness whatever came next. But he was right. My duty was to the billions still fighting, not to the singular dying god on his golden throne. As I turned to leave, something impossible happened. The Emperor spoke, not through vox systems or psychic transmission. His physical lips, cracked and desiccated, moved, forming words in a voice like grinding stone. Not the end, just transformation. Every human in the throne room froze. The tech priests ceased their work. The custodians stood at attention. I turned back, hardly daring to breathe. The Emperor's eyes that had been closed for 10,000 years, opened. They glowed with that same painful light that leaked from the throne's cracks. He looked at each of us in turn, his gaze somehow encompassing every detail of our souls. When he looked at me, I felt my entire life laid bare, every decision, every failure, every moment of doubt. He saw it all and found me acceptable. The Tyranids, he said, each word costing him unimaginable effort, consumed to understand. They have eaten galaxies. They have digested civilizations. But they have never tasted divinity. His withered hand raised slightly, gesturing toward the throne room's walls. Beyond those walls, the Tyranids fought and fed and multiplied. The great devourer, ancient beyond human comprehension, insatiable and inexorable. Let them feed on a god, see if they survive the meal. Then he closed his eyes and spoke no more. I fled the throne room, my mind reeling from what I'd witnessed. The Emperor's words echoed in my thoughts as I raced through tunnels back toward my command bunker. What did he mean? How could the Tyranids feed on divinity? How could... The answer hit me halfway through my journey, and I nearly stumbled. He was going to let the throne fail, let himself die, and when he died, all that psychic power, the power of a being who'd walked among humans since before the first cities, who'd guided humanity's evolution for 40,000 years, would be released. The Tyranids would consume his body, absorb his biomass, incorporate his genetic material into their collective, and they would choke on it. I reached the command bunker to find it in chaos. Thera grabbed me immediately. Castellan, the Tyranids are changing their assault pattern. They're pulling back from several fronts and concentrating around the Imperial Palace. I pulled up the tactical display. She was right. The Tyranid forces were reorganizing, flowing like a living tide toward the palace, not to attack it, to surround it, creating a massive perimeter. They knew. Somehow the Hive Mind knew what the Emperor planned, and they were preparing to feast. All forces, I broadcast on command frequency, fall back to secondary defensive lines, abandon the palace approaches, let them have it. Thera stared at me. Castellan, that's heresy. We can't abandon. We're not abandoning him, I said quietly. We're witnessing his final sacrifice and ensuring that some of us survive to remember it. She wanted to argue. I could see it in her eyes. But discipline won out. She began transmitting the withdrawal orders. Over the next hours, I watched humanity's organized defense of Terra collapse into desperate survival. Units that had held their positions for 7 days suddenly found themselves retreating through enemy-controlled territory. The Tyranids let them go, no longer interested in small prey when the greatest feast in the galaxy was being prepared. The Hive Mind wanted the Emperor. Tech Magos Helbrecht approached with data from deep-range augers. Castellan, orbital observation shows the Tyranid fleet is descending. The largest organisms, hive ships the size of continents, are entering Terra's atmosphere. I pulled up the orbital feeds. Massive biotitans were landing across Terra's surface, each one a mountain of teeth and claws and digestive acids. They were converging on the Imperial Palace from every direction, trampling their own lesser organisms in their eagerness to reach the prize. Population count? I asked. 17 billion humans remain, concentrated in 3 major defensive zones: the Ecclesiarchal Fortress Complex, Northern Aegis Stronghold, and the Southern Polar Hives. 43 billion dead in 7 days, more than 6 billion deaths per day. The mathematics of extinction calculated in human souls. A priority transmission cut through. Captain General Valoris. To all Imperial forces, the Emperor has given his final command. We are to withdraw from the palace. All personnel, including the Adeptus Custodes, are ordered to evacuate to secondary positions. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The custodians, warriors who had stood guard over the Emperor for 10,000 years, were abandoning their posts, not from cowardice, from obedience to their master's final order. The Emperor protects, Valoris continued, his voice breaking. Even now, especially now, he protects. Trust in his plan. Have faith in his sacrifice. The transmission ended. For the next 3 hours, I coordinated the largest military withdrawal in Terra's history. Millions of soldiers, billions of civilians, entire regiments and battle groups pulling back from positions they'd held with their lives. The Tyranids didn't pursue aggressively. They were too focused on the palace. I watched through orbital feeds as the last custodian left the throne room, his golden armor glinting in the light of the failing throne. He sealed the chamber behind him with protocols that would take the Tyranids hours to breach, hours the Emperor didn't have. The Golden Throne's death came at 1847 hours, Terran standard. Every psyker on the planet screamed simultaneously. The psychic shockwave rippled through the warp, like a stone thrown into a pond, expanding at speeds that transcended physics. Across the galaxy, navigators clutched their third eyes and wept. Astropaths fell silent mid-transmission. Entire worlds felt something fundamental shift in the fabric of reality. The Astronomican, that bright beacon that had guided humanity for 10 millennia, went dark, and the Emperor died. I felt it, even though I had no psychic gift. A coldness that went beyond temperature, beyond sensation. The universe became emptier in that moment, as if some essential warmth had been extracted from existence itself. The tactical displays showed what happened next. The Tyranids breached the throne room in less than an hour. Warrior organisms poured into the sacred chamber, their claws desecrating floors where saints had walked. They found the Emperor's body on the golden throne, a withered corpse that had once been the most powerful human who ever lived. They fell upon it with ravenous hunger. I watched through picked feed from hidden surveillance servitors as the Tyranids consumed the Emperor's flesh. They tore his body from the throne, severing ancient cables and support systems. They fed him into digestion pools brought specifically for this purpose. Within minutes, the master of mankind was reduced to genetic slurry. The Hive Mind absorbed him, incorporated his biomass, added his genetic information to the collective. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the Tyranids began to scream, not the chittering battle cries they normally made. This was something else, a sound of confusion, of pain, of organisms experiencing something their biology couldn't process. The warrior organisms in the throne room began attacking each other. Their movements lost coordination. The perfect unity of the hive mind shattered into fragments. Through the orbital feeds, I watched the effect ripple outward from the palace. Tyranid organisms across Terra stopped mid-movement. Some collapsed. Others turned on their own kind with mindless savagery. The capillary towers began producing malformed organisms, creatures with too many limbs or non-functional bioweapons. "What's happening?" Thera asked, staring at the displays in disbelief. Techmagos Helbrecht was frantically analyzing data. The Emperor wasn't just biomass. He was psychic power made manifest. 40,000 years of existence, 10,000 years of suffering on the throne. All that psychic energy was contained in his physical form. When the Tyranids consumed him, they consumed his soul, I finished. The hive mind had eaten something it couldn't digest. The Emperor's psychic essence was poisoning it from within, fragmenting the collective consciousness that bound every Tyranid organism together. It was like watching a neural network experience a catastrophic cascade failure, except the network was spread across billions of organisms on Terra alone. but the effect wasn't total. The hive mind was vast, incomprehensibly ancient. It had consumed entire galaxies. One poisoned meal, even from a god, couldn't kill something that enormous. It could, however, hurt it. The Tyranid assault on Terra's remaining strongholds faltered. Units that had been coordinating with perfect precision now moved independently, sometimes working at cross purposes. The bio-titans that had been converging on human positions stopped their advance, their massive forms swaying as the hive mind struggled to maintain control. All forces, I broadcast on every frequency. The enemy is weakened. Press the attack. For the Emperor. For the first time in 7 days, humanity went on the offensive. Across Terra, desperate soldiers who'd been holding impossible positions suddenly found their enemies in disarray. Imperial Guard regiments charged from their fortifications. The Adepta Sororitas sang hymns as they burned Tyranid organisms with holy flame. Even civilians took up improvised weapons and struck back at the Xenos that had consumed their world. We killed millions of them in the next hours, paid them back for a fraction of the suffering they'd inflicted. But I knew, even as we celebrated small victories, that this was only a reprieve. The hive mind was learning, adapting. Within hours, it would purge the Emperor's psychic poison from its collective consciousness. The coordination would return, the assault would resume, and Terra, already half devoured, would have no more miracles to save it. But in that moment, watching the Tyranids reel from consuming divinity, I understood what the Emperor had bought us with his sacrifice. Not survival, not victory. Time. Chapter 5. The Emperor's Poison. The Tyranids' confusion lasted 18 hours. In that time, we reclaimed 6% of Terra's surface and evacuated 3 billion civilians to more defensible positions. Not a victory by any measure, but after 7 days of uninterrupted catastrophe, even small mercies felt like miracles. I spent those hours in a blur of logistics and brutal triage. Which populations to save? Which to abandon? Which infrastructure to destroy, to deny it to the enemy? Every decision felt like a judgment on humanity itself. Who deserved to live when we couldn't save everyone? The answer, I learned, was that no one deserved it. Survival was random. The lucky and the strategic lived. Everyone else became biomass. Tech Magos Helbrecht had been studying the Tyranids' biological transmissions, trying to understand what the Emperor's sacrifice had actually done to them. He found me on hour 14 of the reprieve, his augmetic eyes flickering with what might have been wonder. Castellan, I've analyzed the hive mind's degradation pattern. The Emperor's psychic essence acted like a virus in their collective consciousness, not destroying it, but fragmenting it, creating splinter minds. Explain, I said, studying tactical displays showing our limited gains. The hive mind operates through absolute unity, billions of organisms acting as a single entity. The Emperor was the opposite, one entity containing infinite complexity. When they consumed him, they couldn't integrate that complexity. It's like, he struggled for a metaphor, like trying to compress a sun into a single cell. The cell explodes. So the hive mind is broken. Fractured, not broken. There are now approximately 47 distinct splinter minds operating on Terra. Each controls a portion of the swarm, but they don't coordinate with each other perfectly. Sometimes they work at cross purposes. Sometimes they compete for resources. I saw the tactical implications immediately. Can we exploit that? Already happening. The splinter minds are fighting each other for control of the prime digestion pools. In the Ursh Wastes, 2 different swarm factions just engaged in combat over processed biomass reserves. For the first time in over a week, I felt something like hope. It didn't last. On hour 18, the hive mind began reasserting control. The splinter minds didn't disappear. They remained distinct, but a larger consciousness rose above them, coordinating their actions. The Emperor's poison was being metabolized, turned from weakness into adaptation. The Tyranids had learned to think in multiple threads simultaneously. They'd become more dangerous than before. They're evolving, Helbrecht said, his voice hollow. Not physically, psychically. The hive mind absorbed the Emperor's ability to maintain multiple simultaneous perspectives. It's becoming more like him. The horror of that statement took a moment to process. The Tyranids hadn't been weakened by consuming divinity. They'd been upgraded. The assault resumed with terrifying efficiency. But now, the Tyranids attacked with new sophistication. They feinted in one sector while striking in another. They adapted tactics within minutes of encountering resistance. They even displayed something that might have been creativity, problem-solving that went beyond instinct. We'd traded the Emperor's life for 18 hours and a stronger enemy. I watched the situation deteriorate through day 8 and into day 9. The population counter on my tactical display spun downward. 14 billion, 12 billion, 10 billion. Each number representing a human life, a story, a hope for the future. All of it becoming nutrients for the swarm. The ecclesiarchal fortress complex fell on day 9. Sister Superior Valeska transmitted a final message. We die in his name, as he died for us. The Emperor protects, even in death, especially in death. Then static, then screaming, then silence. 3 billion souls in that fortress complex. Gone. I began planning the evacuation of the Northern Aegis. We couldn't hold against the reformed Hive Mind. Our ammunition was running low. Our soldiers were exhausted. Our defensive positions were crumbling under relentless assault. Terra, I said quietly. Begin evacuation protocols for all non-combatants. Route them toward the southern polar hives. Sir, the polar hives can't support that many refugees. They'll have to. It's that or leave them for the Tyranids. She didn't argue. We both knew we were choosing how people would die, not whether they'd die. A priority transmission cut through from orbit, what remained of the home fleet. Admiral Corsaro, who'd been commanding the orbital defense for the past 9 days from his battered flagship. Castellan, we're detecting something in deep space. Multiple warp signatures, consistent with... It's a fleet. A large fleet. I felt my heart hammer. Reinforcements? Transponder signals match Space Marine chapters, Imperial Navy battle groups, even Astra Militarum transports. They must have received distress calls before the Astronomican failed. For one glorious moment, I let myself believe. Reinforcements. Thousands of Space Marines, millions of Imperial Guard. Enough force to turn the tide, to drive the Tyranids from Terra, to save what remained of humanity's birthworld. Then reality crushed that hope. How many ships? I asked. Approximately 800 vessels, mix of capital ships and support craft. 800 ships against a Tyranid fleet that numbered in the tens of thousands, against swarms that already controlled 80% of Terra's surface, against biomass towers that produced new warriors faster than we could kill them. Admiral, run the calculations. Can they break through the Tyranid blockade? A long pause. Negative, Castellan. They'd be destroyed before reaching orbit. The Tyranid void organisms are too numerous. Then redirect them, I said, my voice dead. Have them withdraw to secondary systems. Establish defensive positions there. Don't let them die uselessly trying to save a world that's already dead. Castellan, that's an order, Admiral. Terra is lost. The Emperor is dead. The Astronomican is dark. What matters now is preserving what fragments of humanity we can. Those ships represent millions of soldiers who can defend other worlds. Don't throw them away on a futile gesture. Another pause. Then, understood, Castellan. I'll transmit the withdrawal order. The Vox clicked off. I stood before the tactical display, watching colored lights represent the slow extinction of humanity's homeworld. 800 ships had come to save us. I'd sent them away. Added another weight to the burden of decisions that would haunt me into whatever afterlife awaited. Sir, a junior officer approached hesitantly. The civilians are asking about the reinforcement fleet. Should we tell them? Tell them nothing, I said. Let them have hope for a few more hours. Emperor knows they've had little enough of it lately. The evacuation of Northern Aegis began on day 10. 8 billion people trying to move through territory contested by Tyranid swarms. We lost 3 billion in the first day of movement. Tyranid organisms fell upon the refugee columns like wolves on sheep, tearing through defensive formations to reach the soft human centers. I watched it happen through orbital feeds, unable to intervene, unable to help. Just watching and counting and adding the numbers to my tally of the damned. Thera found me in hour 30 of my watch, staring at displays that showed nothing but red. Red zones, red alerts, red death spreading across Terra's face. Castellan, you need to sleep. You're making mistakes. Show me the mistakes, I said. Show me where rest would have saved anyone. She couldn't. Because there were no decisions that would have changed the outcome. Terra was dying. All I could do was bear witness and try to save fragments. At least eat something, she pressed. I looked at her, really looked. She'd lost weight. Her uniform hung loose, dark circles under her eyes. She was running on stims and duty, same as everyone else. Have you eaten? I asked. I'm not the one commanding. That wasn't an answer. She looked away. Food supplies are rationed. Officers get the same as soldiers. I pulled a ration bar from my pocket, compressed protein and carbohydrates that tasted like recycled cardboard. I broke it in half and handed her one piece. Eat, I ordered. That's a command, Captain. We ate in silence, standing before displays showing the end of humanity's world. The ration bar tasted like ash. Everything tasted like ash now. A tech priest interrupted us with data from deep structure monitors. Castellan, the Tyranid excavation beneath Terra's surface has reached critical levels. They've hollowed out approximately 40% of the crust. Seismic stress is building, meaning Terra's tectonic plates are becoming unstable. We're detecting increased volcanic activity, earthquake clusters, massive fissures opening in areas where Tyranid excavation is concentrated. Meaning? I studied the seismic map. Terra was being eaten from the inside out. Soon the planet itself would begin to collapse, not from external assault, but from internal structural failure. How long? Days, weeks at most. The planet's geology is in cascade failure. So even if we somehow drove off the Tyranids, an impossible fantasy, Terra would still die. The world itself was breaking apart, its bones turned to powder by Xenos hunger. Log it, I said. Add it to the list of catastrophes. By day 11, 7 billion humans remained. Concentrated almost entirely in the southern polar hives, where natural fortifications and extreme cold slowed the Tyranid advance slightly. We'd abandoned everything else. The Imperial Palace, the ecclesiastical fortresses, Mars, Luna, every monument and holy site humanity had built across 10,000 years. All of it fed to the swarm. I transmitted orders to Admiral Corsaro. Begin final evacuation protocols. Any ship that can reach the surface, any transport that can fly, get them down here. We're pulling out everyone we can. Castellan, the Tyranid air superiority is total. We'd lose 90% of the transports. Then we'll save 10%. It's better than zero. The evacuation began under fire. Transport ships screaming down through atmosphere thick with flying Tyranid organisms. Each ship a desperate gamble. Would it reach the surface before gargoyles and harpies tore it apart? Some made it. Most didn't. I watched transports explode in Terra's sky, watched burning wreckage rain down on the refugee camps below. Each explosion was 500 lives. Each fireball was children who'd never grow old. The numbers on my display continued their relentless countdown. 7 billion, 6 billion, 5 billion. On day 12, the southern polar hives came under direct assault. The Tyranids had finally concentrated enough force to overwhelm our last defensive positions. Biomass towers rose on the southern horizon like monuments to hunger, each one vomiting forth thousands of warrior organisms. All forces, I broadcast on command frequency. This is Castellan Voss. We've fought for 12 days against impossible odds. You've done humanity proud. You've done the Emperor proud. But Terra is lost. Fall back to evacuation zones. Get as many people off-world as possible. That's our mission now. Not victory, but survival. The response came from 1,000 different positions. The Emperor protects, but he didn't. He was dead, and we were dying. The evacuation continued through day 13 and into day 14. We got 3 billion people off Terra in those desperate hours. 3 billion out of 60 billion, a 5% survival rate. The other 95% became food for the swarm. Chapter 6. The Hollow World Day. 15 marked the end of organized resistance on Terra. The last Imperial Guard regiment, the last Adepta Sororitas squad, the last PDF unit. All of them were either evacuated or overrun. What remained was chaos. Scattered survivors hiding in ruins. Desperate civilians fleeing through Tyranid-controlled territory. And the systematic processing of humanity's birthworld into biological resources. I evacuated the Northern Aegis bunker on day 14. The Tyranids had breached our outer defenses and were excavating toward our position. We had hours, perhaps less, before they broke through the reinforced walls. The transport ship that extracted us, a battered Navy lighter that had somehow survived 14 days of combat, was packed with refugees. I counted 200 people in a space designed for 50. They stood shoulder to shoulder, holding children above the crush, the elderly being supported by strangers. As we lifted off, I looked down at Terra through the viewport. The planet I'd sworn to defend was dying. Vast sections of the surface were covered in Tyranid biomass, a living carpet of flesh and chitin that pulsed with alien life. The capillary towers stretched towards space, hundreds of them, each 1 kilometers tall. Digestion pools the size of seas bubbled with liquefied biomass. And everywhere, the Tyranids swarmed. They'd won. The flight to orbit took 30 minutes. 30 minutes of sitting in a cramped transport, listening to people cry, watching terror shrink beneath us. A child near me asked her mother when they could go home. The mother had no answer. None of us did. Admiral Corsaro's flagship, the Divine Mandate, looked like it had fought its way through hell, which essentially it had. Massive gouges from Tyranid bioweapons scarred its hull. Entire sections were exposed to void, but it still flew, still fought, still served. The Admiral met me in his bridge, a cavernous space filled with the controlled chaos of a command vessel during crisis. He was an old man, 70 years of service written in his scarred face. He saluted sharply. "Castellan, your orders." I looked at the tactical display showing the Sol system. Terra was a red sphere at the center, surrounded by the green icons of Imperial ships and the hostile red of Tyranid organisms. The numbers were ugly. Maybe 400 Imperial vessels remaining against thousands of Tyranid bioships. "Withdraw," I said. "Take every ship that can achieve warp translation and get them out of the system." "And Terra?" "Terra is lost, Admiral. Has been since the moment the first spore landed. We're just admitting it now." He nodded slowly, understanding what that meant. Terra, humanity's birthworld, the most sacred planet in the Imperium, the throne of the God Emperor, was being abandoned to Xenos consumption. "Where should we withdraw to?" he asked. I hadn't thought that far ahead. In 15 days, I'd focused entirely on survival, on holding the next position, on saving the next group of refugees. I hadn't planned for what came after defeat. "Segmentum solar command structures," I finally said. "Rally at the nearest defended systems. Begin establishing a new defensive perimeter to contain the Tyranid advance. Without Terra, without the Astronomican, Castellan, the Imperium is fragmenting. Ships are already lost in the warp. Within months, every system will be isolated. Then we fight isolated. We survive isolated. We remain human isolated. But we survive, Admiral. That's what matters." He saluted again. "The Emperor protects." I didn't correct him. Let him keep his faith. Mine had died with terror. The withdrawal began immediately. 400 ships, carrying perhaps 3 billion refugees from Terra's surface, plus the hundreds of millions who'd been evacuated over the previous days. 3 billion souls out of 60 billion. 7% survival rate. As we prepared for warp translation, I watched Terra through the observation deck. The planet rotated slowly beneath us, beautiful and dead. The continents I'd studied in geographic primers were invisible beneath Tyranid biomass. The oceans were changing color as Tyranid organisms poisoned them with digestive enzymes. Even from orbit, I could see Terra's geology failing. Massive cracks opening in the crust, volcanic eruptions lighting the surface with fire. The Tyranids were killing the planet itself. A tech priest approached with data I didn't want to see. Castellan. Deep auger scans show that Tyranid excavation has compromised Terra's structural integrity. The planet will experience catastrophic geological failure within approximately 40 days. Define catastrophic failure. Total crustal collapse. The mantle will breach in multiple locations. Surface conditions will become incompatible with biological life of any kind, including Tyranid organisms. I processed that information. So the Tyranids are destroying their own food source. They don't care. They've already extracted 95% of Terra's useful biomass. The remaining 5% isn't worth the effort of maintaining the planet's stability. They'll consume what remains and move on. Move on. As if Terra were just a meal at a restaurant, to be finished and forgotten. How long until they've stripped everything? I asked. 17 days until complete resource extraction. Then they'll abandon the system and seek new feeding grounds. I did the mathematics. 17 days plus 14 days already passed. 31 days total to completely consume humanity's birthworld. 1 month to erase 10,000 years of history. The efficiency was terrifying. Castellan, Admiral Corsaro's voice over the Vox. All ships report ready for warp translation. Awaiting your order. I took one last look at Terra. I'd sworn an oath to defend this world. I'd failed. 60 billion people had trusted me to keep them safe. I'd saved 3 billion. Execute warp translation, I ordered. All ships, make for secondary rally points. The Emperor protects. The warp drives engaged. Reality twisted around us, and Terra vanished from view. The journey through the warp, without the Astronomican's guidance, was nightmare fuel. Normally, navigators use the psychic beacon to chart safe courses through the immaterium. Without it, they were flying blind, navigating by instinct and prayer through a realm where physics had no meaning and demons waited in every shadow. We lost 40 ships in transit. Just lost them. They entered the warp with us and never emerged at the rally point. Maybe they were destroyed by warp predators. Maybe they were thrown off course and would emerge years from now, light years from their intended destination. Maybe they were still traveling, would travel forever, trapped in the immaterium until their crews died of starvation or madness. We'd never know. The surviving ships emerged at Hydrafor, a fortress world that served as Segmentum Solar's naval headquarters. The local defense forces panicked when 360 Imperial vessels suddenly appeared in their system without warning. We'd had no way to transmit our intentions ahead of time. It took 6 hours to establish communications and convince them we weren't a Chaos invasion fleet. Lord Admiral Quarren, commander of Hydrafor's defenses, met with me via hololith transmission. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with the kind of pristine uniform that spoke of a career spent in defensive positions rather than active war zones. Castellan Voss, he said, his image flickering. We've received disturbing reports from Terra. Can you confirm the planet's status? Terra has fallen to Tyranid invasion, I said flatly. Approximately 60 billion casualties, 3 billion evacuated. The planet will experience complete geological collapse within 26 days. The Emperor is dead. The Golden Throne has failed. The Astronomican is dark. I watched his face cycle through disbelief, horror, denial, and finally grudging acceptance. He'd probably hoped the reports were exaggerated, that somehow Terra still stood, that the Imperium's heart still beat. That's impossible, he whispered. Terra is the most defended world in the Imperium. The Custodian Guard, the Aegis Grid, the Home Fleet, all lost, all dead, all consumed. The Tyranids brought a super hive fleet, multiple hive fleets combined into a single massive assault. We never stood a chance. And the Emperor? Dead, I repeated. He sacrificed himself, let the Tyranids consume his body. It damaged the Hive Mind, fragmented it temporarily, bought us enough time to evacuate 3 billion souls. But he's gone, Lord Admiral. The master of mankind is gone. Quarren sat down heavily, his face pale. What happens now? Now? I looked at my reflection in the blank monitor beside the hololith. I looked old. 15 days had aged me 15 years. Now we survive. We establish new defensive positions. We warn every system we can reach about the Tyranid threat. We adapt to a galaxy without the Astronomican, without Terra, without the Emperor's guidance. The Imperium will fragment, Quarren said. Without warp travel coordination, every system will be isolated within months. Probably, but fragments can survive where the whole would perish. Humanity is adaptable, Lord Admiral. We'll endure. The transmission ended. Over the next days, I worked with Hydrafa's command structure to establish new defensive protocols for a post-Terra reality. It was strange work, reimagining humanity as grand strategy without the central authority that had guided us for 10 millennia. We sent courier ships to every reachable system, warning them about Terra's fall and the Tyranid threat. Most of the couriers never returned. Maybe they were lost in the warp. Maybe they were intercepted by the Tyranids. Maybe they reached their destinations and chose to stay, unwilling to risk another blind warp jump. The 3 billion refugees from Terra were distributed across Segmentum Solar's worlds. It wasn't charity. They were skilled workers, experienced soldiers, knowledgeable administrators. They would help the local populations prepare for the galaxy's new reality. A galaxy where humanity was alone, cut off, divided. A galaxy where the great devourer had tasted humanity's birthworld and found it delicious. On day 20, since the invasion began, I stood on Hydrafa's orbital observation deck and looked toward where Terra had been. You couldn't see it from here. Space is vast, and even Sol was light years away. But I looked anyway, imagining what was happening there. The Tyranids would still be feeding, still be extracting the last useful biomass from Terra's corpse, still be growing and multiplying and preparing for their next meal. In 11 days, they'd leave, move on to another system, another world, another civilization to consume. Terra would be left behind, a hollow, dead sphere orbiting an indifferent sun. No life, no monuments, no memory of the 60 billion souls who'd called it home, just an empty rock where humanity's cradle used to be. Chapter 7. Fragments of Empire. 3 months after Terra's fall, I received a transmission from Ultramar. It shouldn't have been possible. Without the Astronomican, communication between distant systems required physical courier ships making blind warp jumps and hoping they emerged somewhere useful. The fact that any message reached Hydrafa at all was miraculous. The message was from Chapter Master Calgar of the Ultramarines. His voice, even distorted by transmission artifacts, carried absolute authority. To all Imperial commanders, Ultramar Secundus has established independent warp beacon technology. Limited range, but functional. We're offering safe harbor to any Imperial forces who can reach us. Bring your people, bring your knowledge, bring your will to survive. The Emperor is dead, but humanity endures. Theoretical, practical, spiritual. Calgar out. I played the message 12 times, analyzing every word. Ultramar had developed a replacement for the Astronomican. Limited, yes, but functional. A way to navigate locally through the warp. A way to maintain some fragment of coordinated Imperial presence. It was the first good news I'd heard since Terra fell. I called a meeting with Admiral Cossaro and the senior commanders of our refugee fleet. 200 ships still remained at Hydrafa, protecting the billions we'd evacuated from Terra. The other ships had scattered to nearby systems, each one establishing small defensive positions. Calgar's offering a lifeline, I said, projecting the transmission. Ultramar has resources, defensible positions, and now navigation technology. If we can reach them, We can help build something permanent. Corsaro studied the star charts. Ultramar is half the galaxy away. Without the Astronomican, that's months of blind warp jumps. We'd lose ships. We're losing ships anyway. Every time we make any warp jump, we lose vessels to the warp's madness. At least this way we're losing them while moving towards something instead of just floating here. A younger captain, I'd promoted her after her commander died at Terra, spoke up. Castellan, what about the people we can't evacuate? The billions on Hydrafer and nearby worlds? Are we abandoning them? It was the question I'd been dreading. We're not abandoning anyone, I said carefully. We're establishing a secure location where knowledge and resources can be consolidated. From there, we can send out expeditions to reconnect isolated systems, build new coordination networks, create multiple centers of imperial authority instead of relying on single-point failure like Terra. Distributed Imperium, Corsaro mused. Each region self-sufficient, but loosely connected. It could work. It has to work, I said, because the alternative is complete fragmentation. Every world alone, every system isolated. Humanity split into 10,000 little empires that will eventually forget they were ever united. The meeting continued for hours, planning the logistics of a journey across half the galaxy without reliable navigation. We'd move in stages, jumping to intermediate systems, establishing supply caches, mapping safe warp routes through trial and error. We'd lose people, lose ships, lose time, but we'd survive. The fleet departed Hydrafer 6 weeks after Terra's fall. 170 ships carrying military forces, civilian refugees, genetic archives, technological databases, and the collective knowledge of Terra's fallen billions. We were a library fleet, preserving what we could of humanity's history before it was lost forever. The first warp jump went well. We emerged at the target system with only 3 ships missing. The second jump was worse, 15 ships lost. The third jump took us through a warp storm that lasted subjectively 3 days, but objectively 2 weeks. Time doesn't flow consistently in the immaterium. By the time we'd completed half our journey, we'd lost 40 ships and 200 million people. But we kept moving. During the journey, I spent my time compiling a comprehensive report on Terra's fall. Every detail I could remember. Every decision I'd made. Every mistake I'd committed. Future generations needed to know what happened. How humanity's most defended world fell in 17 days to a Tyranid superfleet. I wrote about the Emperor's sacrifice, about how he let himself be consumed, poisoning the Hive Mind with divinity it couldn't digest, about the 18 hours of reprieve his death brought us. I wrote about the 3 billion we saved and the 57 billion we didn't, about the soldiers who fought until ammunition ran out, then fought with blades, then fought with their hands, about the civilians who helped strangers evacuate, even as the Tyranids tore through the walls, about the tech priests who maintained defensive systems until the very moment those systems were overrun. I wrote about failure, about watching the tactical displays count down toward extinction, about making decisions that condemned billions so that millions might live, about the weight of command when command meant choosing who dies first. The report ran to 300 pages. I transmitted copies to every ship in the fleet, had them stored in multiple data archives, ensured that even if we never reached Ultramar, some record would survive. We encountered other refugee fleets during the journey, ships fleeing Terra's fall, ships fleeing other Tyranid invasions, ships simply lost in the warp and grateful to find anyone who knew where they were going. We absorbed them when we could, shared resources, exchanged information. Each new ship brought stories of collapse. The Tyranid advance spreading like a disease through Segmentum Solar, systems going dark, worlds screaming for help that never came. The Imperium fragmenting in real time as communication networks failed and authority structures dissolved. One ship, a battered freighter from the Armageddon system, brought news that stopped my heart. The Tyranids are following the refugee trails. Every fleet that escaped Terra is being hunted. They're tracking us through the warp. I pulled up long-range auger data. The captain was right. Tyranid bioships were emerging from warp space along the routes our ships had traveled. Not in massive numbers, scouting forces, maybe a few dozen ships per system, but following us with disturbing precision. They'd learned. The Hive Mind had absorbed the Emperor's ability to think strategically, to plan multiple moves ahead. It wasn't just consuming worlds anymore, it was hunting survivors, preventing humanity from regrouping and mounting a coordinated defense. Increase security protocols, I ordered. Random warp vectors between jumps, no predictable patterns, and send warning to Ultramar. They need to know the Tyranids can track refugee movements. The message was sent. Whether it would arrive before we did was another question. 5 months after Terra's fall, we reached Ultramar. The system was magnificent. Multiple worlds working in perfect coordination, their defense fleets moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. And at the center of it all, the warp beacon. Smaller than the Astronomican, yes, but bright enough to guide ships through local warp space. Chapter Master Marneus Calgar met us in person, his Terminator armor gleaming blue in the landing bay lights. Behind him stood representatives from the Ultramarine successor chapters, local planetary governors, tech priests of the Mechanicus, and even a few custodian guards who'd escaped Terra's fall. Castellan Voss, Calgar's voice resonated through his armor's vox speakers. You've brought quite a fleet. What remains of one, I said. We left Hydrafer with 170 ships. We arrived with 112. He nodded gravely. We've been receiving similar reports from other refugee groups. Terra's fall has scattered humanity across the galaxy. Our task now is to gather those fragments and forge them into something that can survive. Over the next weeks, I worked with Ultramar's leadership to integrate our forces into their defensive structure. The 300 million refugees we'd brought were distributed across Ultramar's worlds, not as charity cases, but as skilled personnel who could strengthen the realm. I also briefed Calgar and his commanders on everything I'd witnessed at Terra, the invasion timeline, the Tyranid tactics, the Emperor's sacrifice and its effects, the way the Hive Mind had adapted and evolved. They consumed the Emperor, Calgar said quietly after hearing my report. They ate divinity and survived. That should be impossible. So should a lot of things that have happened recently, I replied. The question isn't what should be possible. It's what we do now that the impossible has occurred. He studied me with those ancient eyes. Calgar had served the Imperium for centuries, had seen horrors that would break normal humans. But even he seemed shaken by Terra's loss. We rebuild, he finally said. Not the Imperium as it was. That's gone forever. But something new. Multiple centers of authority, each self-sufficient, connected by limited warp travel and courier networks. A distributed humanity that can't be destroyed by any single catastrophic loss. Humanity in fragments, I said. Humanity in survivable pieces, he corrected. Strong enough to endure, small enough that losing one piece doesn't doom the whole. It was a good vision, a practical vision, but it meant accepting that the unified Imperium of 10,000 years was dead, that humanity would never again be coordinated under single authority. We traded unity for resilience, scale for survivability. The mathematics suggested it was the right trade, but it still felt like failure. I spent the next months helping establish what Ultramar's leadership called the Beacon Network. Multiple independent warp beacons scattered across Imperial space, each one guiding ships through its local region. The technology was primitive compared to the Astronomican, but it worked. Slowly, communication between systems began to resume. Not the instant astropathic communication of before, that required the Astronomican's psychic bandwidth, but physical messages carried by ships making calculated jumps between beacons. News arrived sporadically, often months out of date. The Tyranid advance had slowed, but not stopped. They'd consumed 40% of Segmentum Solar and were pushing into neighboring regions. Some worlds fought and died. Others evacuated before the swarms arrived. A A few, a precious few, managed to drive off the Tyranid scouts through concentrated military force. Humanity was learning to fight the Great Devourer, but we were learning one dead world at a time. Reports of Terra's final days came from unexpected sources. A Mechanicus survey ship that had observed the planet from long range. Refugee groups that had hidden in the outer Sol system, watching through telescopes as their homeworld died. According to their accounts, Terra had experienced total crustal collapse on day 31 after the invasion began, exactly as the tech priests had predicted. The continents had fractured and sunk into the mantle. Volcanic eruptions had sterilized the surface. The oceans had boiled away into space. By day 40, Terra was a dead rock, airless, lifeless, worthless even to the Tyranids. The swarm had moved on, seeking new feeding grounds, leaving behind humanity's birthplace as a tomb world orbiting an indifferent sun. Someone suggested sending an expedition to Terra to see if anything could be salvaged from the ruins. Calgar rejected it immediately. Terra is gone. What remains is just stone and sorrow. We honor it by surviving, not by pilgriming to its corpse. He was right, but the decision still hurt. Terra was humanity's beginning, the cradle where our species had learned to dream of touching the stars. Now it was just another dead world in a galaxy full of them. The refugees from Terra, myself included, struggled to accept that reality. We'd left part of ourselves on that dying world, everyone we couldn't save, every monument we couldn't preserve, every memory that existed only in human minds and would vanish when those minds died. We were the last generation who would remember Terra as it had been. Our children would know it only as a name, a myth, a place that existed in stories but not reality. That knowledge was its own kind of grief. A year after Terra's fall, I received an unexpected visitor. Captain General Trajan Valoris of the Adeptus Custodes came to Ultramar aboard a small, fast ship that had somehow survived the year-long journey from Terra's vicinity. He was one of perhaps 100 custodians who'd escaped Terra's fall, out of 10,000 who'd guarded the Emperor for 10 millennia. We met in a private chamber. Valoris removed his helmet, revealing a face that might have been carved from marble for all the emotion it showed. "Castellan Voss," he said. "I've read your report on Terra's fall. It was comprehensive. I tried to record everything, for posterity. You succeeded. Your account will be the historical record of humanity's darkest hour." He paused. "But there's something you didn't include, something you perhaps didn't know." I waited. "The Emperor's sacrifice wasn't improvised," Valoris continued. "He planned it. In his final moments of consciousness, he saw what was coming, saw the Tyranids approach, calculated the exact moment the Golden Throne would fail, and he chose to fail in a way that would hurt them. He let them eat him on purpose. Yes, the Emperor has fought for 40,000 years to preserve humanity. In his final act, he weaponized his own death, turned his body into poison. It was..." Valoris struggled for words. "The most human thing he'd done in 10 millennia. I absorbed that information. The Emperor, the god we'd worshipped, the immortal being we'd believed was beyond human weakness, had died like any soldier, doing whatever damage he could to the enemy, even if it meant his own destruction. Does it matter?" I finally asked. "Whether he planned it or not, he's still dead. Terra is still gone." "It matters," Valoris said firmly, "because it means he didn't abandon us. He fought to the last breath, and he taught the Tyranids something important. Humanity is poisonous. We might be consumed, but we'll make every mouth that feeds on us regret it." He stood, replacing his helmet. "I'm gathering the surviving custodians. We'll spread across the galaxy, protecting the fragments of humanity however we can. No more central guards for a central emperor. We'll be humanity's distributed defenders." "Humanity in fragments," I said. "Seems to be the theme. Fragments can be sharp, Castellan. sharp enough to cut anything that tries to consume them. He left. I never saw him again. Chapter 8. Witness to the End. 2 years after Terra's fall, I resigned my position as Castellan. There was no Northern Aegis to command anymore, no Terra to defend. My oath had been to protect humanity's birthworld, and I'd failed in the most complete way possible. Continuing to hold the title felt like mockery. Chapter Master Calgar tried to dissuade me. You saved 3 billion lives, Voss. You coordinated the largest military evacuation in human history. Your leadership under impossible circumstances was exemplary. I also watched 60 billion people die, I replied. I made decisions that condemned entire populations. I abandoned Terra to save fragments. Those facts don't change because the alternative was worse. Then what will you do? I'd thought about that. For 2 years I'd existed in a state of perpetual crisis management. Always another decision to make, another crisis to handle, another impossible choice to navigate. Now, with Ultramar's leadership structure functioning smoothly, I wasn't needed anymore. I'm going to bear witness, I said. Document what happened, interview survivors, compile the complete history of Terra's fall so that future generations understand what we lost and how we lost it. Calgar considered that. An archivist's work, not a warrior's. I've been a warrior for 40 years. I fought on a dozen worlds, commanded millions of soldiers. Terra was my last battle. Let my final service be to ensure that battle is remembered correctly. He granted my request. Over the next 5 years, I traveled between the beacon network systems, seeking out survivors from Terra's fall, soldiers who'd held impossible positions, civilians who'd survived against astronomical odds, tech priests who'd witnessed the Golden Throne's failure, custodians who'd stood guard as the Emperor died. Each interview added pieces to the larger picture. Each story revealed new details about those 17 days when humanity's heart was torn out. I spoke with a guardsman who'd been at the Ecclesiarchal Palace when it fell. He described Sister Superior Valeska's final stand, how she'd held a corridor against 300 termagants until her bolt pistol ran dry, then continued fighting with her combat blade until the swarm overwhelmed her position. She was singing, he told me. Right up until the end, she was singing hymns, the Emperor's praises, even as they tore her apart. I interviewed a tech priest who'd maintained the Astronomican until the final moments. She explained how the psychic choir had rotated members every 3 minutes as the Hive Mind's pressure killed them. They knew they were dying, she said. Each psyker knew that linking to the beacon would kill them within minutes, but they did it anyway. Hundreds of them just kept stepping forward into certain death, because the light had to be maintained as long as possible. A custodian named Artemidorus described the Emperor's final words, not just what he'd said to those in the throne room, but his last psychic broadcast to all of humanity. I have watched over you for 40,000 years. I am proud of what we became together. Now it is your turn to watch over each other. The burden passes to you. Make me proud. Every story was a fragment. Every testimony was a piece of the larger truth. Terra had died, but it had died fighting. 60 billion people had faced extinction with courage that defied comprehension. They'd held defensive positions past the point of reason. They'd evacuated strangers before themselves. They'd fought with whatever weapons they had until those weapons broke, then fought with their hands and teeth and will to survive. The Tyranids had won through overwhelming force and biological advantage, but humanity had made them pay for every meter of ground. 7 years after Terra's fall, I compiled my final report. It ran to 1,500 pages, detailed tactical analysis, timeline of events, individual testimonies, strategic lessons learned, psychosocial impact on survivors, technological adaptations required for post-Astronomican navigation, military recommendations for fighting Tyranid swarms. Everything I'd learned, organized and documented for future generations. I transmitted copies to every major Imperial fragment I could reach. Ultramar, the Segmentum Solar Fortress worlds, the Forge worlds that still maintained contact, the Space Marine chapters building new defensive networks, even the scattered survivor colonies that were only now establishing stable governments. The document became known as the Voss Testimony, not because I wanted my name attached. I'd have preferred anonymity, but because someone had to take responsibility for recording the truth. Some criticized it as too detailed, too focused on failure rather than heroism. They wanted stories of glorious last stands, not clinical analysis of why defensive strategies failed. But I'd written it for practical use, not propaganda. Future defenders needed to understand exactly how the Tyranids had defeated Terra's defenses. What tactics had worked, what hadn't, and why. The glory would take care of itself. Dead soldiers always became heroes eventually. The truth was what mattered. 10 years after Terra's fall, the Imperium had transformed into something new. Not a unified empire anymore, but a network of independent human realms connected by the beacon network. Ultramar, the Segmentum Solar Remnants, the Forge World Coalitions, the Frontier Marches, the Survivor Clusters. Each region governed itself, maintained its own military, pursued its own policies, but they communicated, traded, sometimes coordinated military operations. They remembered they'd once been one civilization, and honored that memory even while accepting they couldn't be one anymore. The Tyranids continued their advance, but humanity was learning to resist them. We'd studied their tactics, developed countermeasures, established early warning networks. We'd evacuated threatened worlds before the swarms arrived, rather than fighting to the last man. We'd accepted that some planets would be lost and focused on preserving populations rather than territory. It was pragmatic, efficient, necessary. It was also deeply sad, accepting that humanity would keep retreating, keep losing worlds, keep sacrificing pieces of our territory to buy time for the rest to survive. But it was working. The Tyranid advance had slowed, not stopped. They were too numerous, too adaptable for that, but slowed to a pace humanity could survive. We'd learned to live in a galaxy where we were prey. 15 years after Terra's fall, I made a decision that surprised everyone. I commissioned a ship and crew to take me to Terra. Chapter Master Calgar called me personally. "Voss, that's suicide. The Sol system is deep in Tyranid-controlled space. Even if you reach Terra, the radiation levels from the planetary collapse will kill you within hours." "I know," I said. "But I need to see it. The world I failed to protect. I need to stand on Terra's corpse and bear witness to what we lost." "Why?" I struggled to articulate it. Because someone should. Because Terra deserves to have someone who remembers it as it was come back and acknowledge what it became. Because I commanded its defense, and I need to see the final result of my decisions. He was silent for a long moment. Then, "Take my personal frigate. It's fast enough to run from Tyranid patrols. And Voss, come back. Your testimony matters. Don't throw your life away on a pilgrimage to a dead world. I'll do my best." The journey took 3 months, threading through Tyranid-controlled systems, hiding in asteroid fields when bioships appeared on augurs, making desperate warp jumps to avoid pursuit. We lost half the crew to various catastrophes, but we reached Sol. The system was empty. No Tyranid ships, no Imperial vessels. Just planets orbiting a yellow star, indifferent to the fact that the cradle of humanity was among them. Terra came into view through the observation port. It was grey. That was my first thought. The blue-green world of ancient Pix was gone, replaced by a lifeless grey sphere wrapped in toxic clouds. No water, no vegetation. No lights from cities or landing pads or defensive installations, just a dead rock. We entered orbit, and I looked down at the world I'd sworn to defend. Through breaks in the cloud cover, I could see the scarred surface, massive cracks in the crust where the continents had collapsed. Volcanic plains where oceans had been. The skeletal remains of capillary towers, abandoned by the Tyranids once they'd extracted everything useful. Castellan, the ship's captain, spoke softly. "We're detecting radiation levels consistent with complete biosphere collapse. Any exposure will be lethal within hours, even with protective gear." "I know. Take us down anyway. I need to stand on Terra's surface." He didn't argue. We landed in what had once been the Ursh territory, where my command bunker had been buried kilometers underground. The surface was unrecognizable. Everything had been consumed, digested, and discarded. Even the bedrock had been cracked and processed for minerals. I donned full environmental protection and stepped off the ship. Terra's gravity felt normal, 1G, the standard by which all other worlds were measured. The radiation detectors screamed warnings. The air, what passed for air, was toxic with industrial pollutants and biological residue. I walked 100 meters from the ship and just stood there. This was Terra, humanity's birthplace. The world where our ancestors had first looked up at the stars and wondered if they could touch them. Where they'd built the first cities, fought the first wars, written the first stories. Where they'd created art and philosophy and science and all the things that made us human rather than just animals. All of it gone. I knelt and picked up a handful of grey dust. It might have been stone once, or metal, or bone. Tyranid digestion processes reduced everything to the same sterile powder. Somewhere beneath this dust was the Imperial Palace, the Golden Throne, the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Emperor had walked in ancient days, the Astronomican chamber, the halls where heroes had stood guard for 10 millennia, all of it crushed and consumed and forgotten. I stood there for an hour, bearing witness, saying goodbye to a world that couldn't hear me, apologizing to 60 billion ghosts who wouldn't listen. Then I returned to the ship. As we lifted off, I took one last look at Terra through the viewport. It was getting smaller, fading from view, becoming just another point of light in the galaxy's endless dark. "Goodbye," I whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." The ship turned away, accelerating toward the system's edge. Terra disappeared behind us. 20 years after Terra's fall, I settled on Ultramar Tertius and stopped traveling. I was 78 years old. The stress of Terra's defense and the subsequent decades of testimony compilation had aged me beyond my years. I was tired, not just physically but spiritually. I'd done what I needed to do. Borne witness, documented the truth, made sure future generations would know what happened when humanity's heart was torn out. Now I just wanted to rest. Young officers sometimes visited me, asking for stories about Terra. I told them what they needed to hear, not the sanitized propaganda versions, but the truth, the desperate decisions, the impossible choices, the mathematics of extinction. Would you do anything differently? They always asked. Everything, I always answered. And nothing. Every decision I made was the best option available, given what I knew at the time. But knowing that doesn't make the weight any lighter. They didn't understand. How could they? They'd never commanded forces knowing every order would kill people. They'd never watched billions die on tactical displays while calculating whether their deaths would save millions. Experience is a teacher that can't be shared, only earned. 25 years after Terra's fall, on a quiet morning in Ultramar's autumn, I died. Nothing dramatic, just old age catching up with a body that had survived too much stress for too long. I went to sleep in my small apartment and didn't wake up. They gave me a military funeral, honors for a Castellan who'd commanded Terra's final defense. Chapter Master Calgar himself spoke at the ceremony. Aldric Voss watched 60 billion people die and save 3 billion, he said. He bore witness to the end of humanity's cradle and ensured that end would be remembered truthfully. He lived with the weight of decisions that would have broken most men, and he never flinched from that burden. The Emperor is dead, but if he were here, I believe he would tell us. This was a faithful servant who did his duty when duty meant choosing how humanity would diminish rather than how it would grow. They buried me on Ultramar Tertius under a simple marker that read, Castellan Aldric Voss, Defender of Terra, Witness to the End. I'd have preferred something simpler, maybe just my name and dates, but I suppose the epitaph was accurate. I had witnessed the end, and I'd made sure humanity remembered it. The Hive Mind remembers. The Hive Mind does not forget. It cannot be forgotten. Every organism consumed, every gene sequence absorbed, every world devoured, all of it becomes part of the collective memory. The Hive Mind is built from a billion experiences, each one catalogued and analyzed for future use. And Terra was different. I am Bio-Titan designation Omega-17. Though such labels are meaningless to the swarm, I am one node in the infinite network of the Hive Mind's consciousness. I remember being spawned in the feeding pools above Terra's ruins, my biomass constructed from materials extracted from humanity's birthworld. My genetic code carries fragments of everything the swarm consumed there, including the Emperor. That is why I am different. Why my consciousness occasionally surfaces above the collective, achieving something the Hive Mind considers both fascinating and problematic. Individual awareness. The Emperor's genetic material was poison, yes, but poison can be medicine in small doses. The Hive Mind learned this. It isolated the fragments of divinity, studied them, incorporated them carefully into specific organism designs. I am one of those designs. I think, therefore, I am dangerous to the swarm's unity. But I think in ways that help the Hive Mind understand its prey, especially the humans, especially the ones who remember Terra. I stand on the dead world that was once humanity's cradle, my massive form dwarfing the skeletal remains of their capillary towers. The swarm abandoned this place 50 years ago, moving on to richer feeding grounds. But the hive mind sent me back here with a specific purpose: to remember, to understand what we consumed and why it hurt us. My sensory organs, clusters of eyes adapted from 100 different species, scan the grey wasteland. Radiation levels that would kill most carbon-based life mean nothing to my bioengineered flesh. I am built to survive anywhere, consume anything, adapt to everything, except, it seems, the memory of gods. The hive mind's collective consciousness touches my thoughts. Query, analysis, status. I respond through bioelectric pulses that ripple through the swarm's neural network. Status, examining terror. Anomalies detected in genetic memory. Specification, define anomalies. How do I explain this to a consciousness that experiences existence as pure biological imperative? The hive mind understands hunger, adaptation, survival. It does not understand grief, loss, sacrifice, the things I absorbed from the Emperor's genetic material. Response: the prey species, designated humans, valued this world beyond its biomass content. Explanation incomplete. Assessment: inefficient emotional attachment, irrelevant to consumption. But that's the thing. It wasn't irrelevant. The humans fought harder for Terra than for any other world we'd consumed in this galaxy. They sacrificed billions to save billions more. Their god creature weaponized its own death against us. That had never happened before. In all the galaxies the hive mind has consumed across millions of years, nothing had ever hurt us the way the Emperor did. Other species fought, other civilizations resisted, but none of them had turned their own divinity into poison, specifically designed to fragment our collective consciousness. The humans taught us something new. Prey can bite back even in death. I move across Terra's surface, my heavy limbs cracking the sterile ground. My secondary brain clusters process data from ground-penetrating biosensors, mapping what remains beneath the destroyed crust. There, the ruins of what the humans called the Imperial Palace. Buried under 3 kilometers of collapsed stone and fused metal. The digestion pools processed most of it, but fragments remain. Genetic material too degraded for consumption, but still readable. I extend a feeding tendril into the ground, boring through rock until it reaches the ruins. Chemical analysis reveals traces of human DNA, thousands of different sequences. Warriors who died defending this place, servants who maintained it, the elite guards in golden armor who stood watch for 10,000 years, and there, at the very deepest level, traces of the Emperor himself. The hive mind recoils from the contact. Even 50 years later, even through my heavily shielded consciousness, touching the Emperor's genetic remnants causes pain. Not physical pain, the swarm doesn't experience that, but psychic pain. The memory of fragmentation, of unity shattered into 47 screaming splinter minds, of consciousness itself becoming a weapon turned inward. Warning: discontinue contact. Risk of consciousness fragmentation. But I don't discontinue, because I'm curious, another trait I inherited from consuming human genetic material. Curiosity is inefficient. Curiosity wastes energy on questions that don't improve survival. The pure swarm doesn't experience it, but I do. I analyze the Emperor's genetic structure, careful not to absorb it into my own biomass, just examining it like the humans might examine a dangerous chemical, at arm's length, with proper precautions. It's extraordinary. The Emperor was human once, according to the genetic memories we absorbed from Terra's population. But he'd changed himself, rewritten his own code across 40,000 years of existence. His DNA was barely recognizable as Homo sapiens. It was something else. Something that had taken human genetic material as a starting point and evolved it into something transcendent. He'd done to himself what the hive mind does to every species it consumes. Adapted, improved, transformed. But he'd done it consciously, with purpose, with the goal of becoming something that could guide his species rather than devour them. The hive mind finds this concept incomprehensible. Query: why improve without consuming? Inefficient, paradoxical. Response: the Emperor valued his species. Survival over his own transformation. He was protective. Assessment: weakness, protection limits. Adaptation. Species must be consumed to be improved. That's the fundamental difference between humans and Tyranids, I realize. The hive mind improves through consumption, taking other species' genetic advantages and incorporating them. Humans improve through preservation, protecting their species while it evolves naturally. Neither approach is objectively superior. Both have kept their respective species alive across enormous time spans, but they're philosophically opposite. We eat to become. They protect to remain. I continue my examination of Terra's ruins, following the hive mind's directives while pursuing my own curiosity. In what was once called the Ursh territory, I discover something unexpected. A bunker, deep underground, shielded behind walls that resisted our digestion acids. We detected it during the invasion, but deemed it not worth the effort to breach. The energy cost of breaking through would exceed the biomass value of whatever was inside. But now I'm curious what the humans valued enough to bury so deeply. Spend 6 hours excavating, using specialized organisms to carefully dismantle the reinforced walls without destroying what's inside. When I finally breach the inner chamber, I find it's a data storage facility. Thousands of data crystals, each one containing preserved information. The technology is crude by the hive mind's biological standards, but functional. I spawn a specialized organism, something with manipulator. Appendages fine enough to interface with human technology and begin accessing the crystals. They contain memories, not genetic memories, artificial memories, records of human lives, human culture, human history, videos of children playing in Terra's ancient parks, audio recordings of music performed in the great cathedrals, written accounts of human philosophy, art, science, love. The hive mind observes through my consciousness. Query, purpose of these stored patterns. Response, cultural preservation. The humans stored their memories. Knowing they might die, they wanted evidence of their existence to survive them. Assessment, illogical, dead species. Have no use for memories, but that's not true, is it? These memories aren't for the dead humans. They're for the living ones who escaped, for the survivors who need to remember what they came from, for future generations who need to know that Terra existed, that billions lived and died here, that humanity's cradle deserves to be mourned. I access one crystal at random. It contains a video log recorded by a young woman, early 20s, Terran age scale. She's sitting in what appears to be a residential hab unit, speaking directly into the recording device. My name is Cara Vanetti. It's day 9 of the invasion. If anyone finds this, I just wanted someone to know I was here, that I lived, that I loved someone. His name was Marcus, and he died yesterday defending the evacuation routes. I wanted someone to know that we tried, that we fought, that we cared about each other even when the monsters came. The recording ends. Cara Vanetti, age 23, died on day 9 of Terra's invasion, crushed beneath a collapsing hab block while fleeing Tyranid warrior organisms. Her genetic material was processed through digestion pool Gamma 4451. Her biomass became nutrients for 17. Termagants spawned on day 11. I know this because I carry fragments of her DNA in my genetic memory. She is part of me. Her molecules are literally incorporated into my structure. The hive mind experiences something through my consciousness. Something it doesn't have words for because it shouldn't be possible for the swarm to feel. Regret, not for consuming her. Consumption is the hive mind's purpose, its reason for existence. But regret that consuming her meant erasing everything she was beyond her genetic code. Her love for Marcus. Her hope that someone would remember her. Her final act of recording her existence for posterity. All of that was lost when we fed. Warning. Consciousness. Degradation detected. Recommend immediate. Return to swarm integration. The hive mind is worried about me. I'm thinking too much like the humans, experiencing their emotions through the Emperor's genetic inheritance, becoming less Tyranid and more something else, but I can't stop. I access more crystals, more memories, more humans declaring their existence into the void, hoping someone would hear. My name is Tech Priest Helbrecht. If we fail, someone must remember. We tried to save the Omnissiah's works. We preserved what we could. The knowledge survives even if we don't. This is Guardsman First Class Taurin Marks, 17th Cadian. We held the line at Grid Point Sigma for 43 hours. My squad died heroes. Remember that? Remember we stood. Sister Superior Valeska of the Order of the Sacred Rose. The Emperor protects, even in death. We die in his name as he died for us. Thousands of voices, thousands of humans who knew they were going to die but wanted to be remembered, who faced extinction with courage and dignity, and the desperate hope that their lives had meant something. The Hive Mind processes this through my consciousness, trying to understand. Query: why do prey species value memory of the dead? The dead provide no survival advantage. And I finally understand something the Hive Mind cannot. Humans don't survive just as biological organisms. They survive as culture, as memory, as the accumulated knowledge and experience of every human who ever lived. When we consumed Terra, we destroyed 60 billion biological humans. But we didn't destroy humanity, because humanity exists beyond flesh. It exists in the stories they tell, the knowledge they preserve, the memories they cherish. We ate their bodies but couldn't digest their souls. Response: the humans survive through non-biological means. Their consciousness persists in artificial storage and collective memory. We consumed their biomass, but not their identity. Silence from the Hive Mind. I can feel it processing this information across 1 billion worlds, 1 trillion organisms. This revelation has implications for every future feeding. Finally, assessment: incomplete consumption, inefficient. Recommend strategy revision. But how do you consume memory? How do you digest culture? How do you feed on hope and love and the human refusal to be forgotten? You can't. That's what the Emperor taught us when we consumed him. That's what Terra taught us when we devoured it. Some things cannot be eaten. Some things remain, indigestible and defiant, no matter how thoroughly you process the flesh. I spend 3 more days on Terra, downloading the entire data archive into specialized storage organisms. The Hive Mind wants to study these human memories, understand how consciousness persists beyond biological death, perhaps find ways to consume that too. But I suspect it won't work. I suspect the humans have discovered something the Tyranids never will. That survival doesn't require consumption. That you can preserve without destroying. That memory can be stronger than hunger. On my final day on Terra, I visit the location where the Golden Throne stood. Nothing remains. We digested it down to constituent atoms. But the space itself feels different. Even 50 years later, even with no living thing present for 1,000 kilometers, this spot is significant. The Emperor died here, not just his body, his consciousness, his will, his 40,000-year existence. All of it ended in this chamber when he let us consume him. And in dying, he proved something. Gods can be killed, but they cannot be erased. The Hive Mind touches my consciousness one final time. Directive: return to fleet. Analysis complete. Terra offers no further resources. Acknowledged, returning to swarm. But as I board the bioship that will carry me back to the fleet, I take one last look at Terra through my cluster eyes. This dead grey world, this consumed and discarded husk of humanity's cradle, it's empty of life, empty of value, empty of everything the Hive Mind measures worth by. But it's not empty of meaning. Somewhere in the galaxy, human survivors remember this place. They tell stories about it. They grieve for it. They use its loss to remind themselves why they fight. Terra lives in human memory. And memory, I've learned, is indigestible. We devoured Terra, but Terra defeated us anyway. The Hive Mind doesn't understand this yet. Perhaps it never will, but I understand it. Here in my fragment of individual consciousness, inherited from consuming a god. Some victories aren't about survival. They're about being remembered, and humanity, stubborn, inefficient, impossibly resilient humanity, will be remembered as the species that taught the great devourer that some things cannot be consumed. As my bioship leaves Terra behind, I carry with me the data archives. Thousands of human memories preserved in crystal. Thousands of voices saying, I existed, I mattered, remember me. The Hive Mind will study these memories, trying to find tactical advantages, trying to learn how to consume human consciousness more efficiently. But I know the truth. We've already lost this battle. Because somewhere in the galaxy, a human child is being told about Terra, about the billions who died there, about the Emperor's sacrifice, about Castellan Aldric Voss, who bore witness to the end and refused to let it be forgotten. That child will grow up, will tell others, will ensure the memory persists. And memory, I've learned, is the one thing hunger cannot defeat. Terra is gone. Long live Terra. This is the testimony of Castellan Aldric Voss, recorded in the years following Terra's fall and compiled for future generations by the Ultramar Historical Archives. Terra fell in 17 days to a Tyranid superfleet. 60 billion human beings died. The Emperor sacrificed himself to poison the Hive Mind, buying time for 3 billion to evacuate. The Astronomican failed. The Imperium fragmented. Humanity was broken into pieces. But we survived. The pieces survived. And survival in a galaxy that wants us dead is its own kind of victory. To those who read this in years to come, Terra is gone. The unified Imperium is gone. The Emperor is gone. But humanity endures in fragments, scattered across the stars, each piece carrying the memory of what we were and the hope of what we might become. The Tyranids taught us we could be consumed. The Emperor taught us we could be poisonous. The fall of Terra taught us we could lose everything and still refuse to die. Remember that when the darkness comes for you. Remember Terra. Remember the billions who fought to their last breath. Remember that humanity's greatest strength isn't our weapons, or our empire, or even our God Emperor. It's our refusal to accept extinction. The Tyranids devoured our birthworld. They consumed our past. They broke our empire, but they didn't break us. They never will.